Before we dive in, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. The boy who would be called Gaspipe grew up on the cracked sidewalks of Brooklyn, where the air always smelled like rain on hot pavement and fried onions drifting out of basement kitchens. His name was Anthony Casso, the son of a truck driver, raised in a row of brick houses where you could hear a neighbor's argument through thin walls. He was small for his age, but his eyes carried something that made other kids keep their distance, sharp, restless, like he was already calculating who would fold first in a fight. He never talked much. When he did, it was clipped, to the point, as if words were better spent sparingly. Anthony didn't come from power, but he saw it early. The corner clubs, the parked Cadillacs outside diners, the men who never seemed to punch a clock yet always had money folded neat in their pockets. He noticed how shopkeepers bent their heads lower when certain men walked in. That kind of respect, or fear, left a mark. By the time he was a teenager, he had decided, if the world was divided between the ones who paid and the ones who collected, he'd rather collect. And soon enough, somebody gave him the chance. He started small, the way most did, running errands, carrying envelopes, delivering messages that no one else wanted to risk being caught with. Anthony was sharp, fast, and most of all, he never asked questions. That was what the older guys liked about him. In those early years, he learned how to listen without moving his lips, how to remember details without ever writing them down. He had no use for notebooks. The names and numbers stayed locked in his head, and that made him valuable. The social clubs became his second home. Dim rooms with wood-paneled walls, stale smoke curling from ashtrays, and men who weighed every word before letting it leave their mouths. Anthony watched them all. He saw who controlled the flow of coffee, who picked up the tab, who spoke last and left first. Power wasn't loud, it was quiet, steady, the way a man leaned in his chair while others waited for his nod. Soon, he was more than a messenger. He was the guy you sent when someone needed reminding, when a debt was late, when silence had to be broken. He didn't shout, didn't posture. He just showed up, calm and certain, and that was usually enough. But not everyone stayed convinced. One night, in a damp basement lit by a single bulb, Anthony earned the name that would follow him for the rest of his life. The job was simple, a man owed money and thought he could stall. Anthony was sent to make him understand. The room was full of sweating metal pipes, the kind that rattled every time the furnace kicked in. Anthony worked him over with a length of pipe pulled from the wall, quick and brutal. When he walked out, the man was still breathing, but everyone knew he'd never make the same mistake twice. From then on, the whispers followed, Gaspipe. Anthony didn't like it at first. It sounded crude, almost childish. But he realized something, the name carried weight. It spread faster than his footsteps ever could. Fear has a way of traveling farther than truth, and the street started bending before he even arrived. By his 20s, he was already climbing, rung by rung, through the Lucchese ranks. He had a style of his own. Always in dark suits, shoes polished so you could see yourself in them. He ate quick, rarely lingered. He preferred meetings at dawn, when the city was still half asleep. Those who crossed him didn't sleep at all. And word was, he was just getting started. Gaspipe's rise wasn't loud, it was precise. He knew how to make himself indispensable. Trucks went missing at the docks. He found them. A bookmaker hesitated on payments. Anthony showed up, calm, with a deadline that never needed repeating. He was the kind of man who got things done without leaving fingerprints. The bosses noticed, and soon he wasn't just a soldier, he was a problem solver, the kind of guy you trusted when the stakes were high. What made him dangerous wasn't just his violence, it was his mind. He remembered faces, numbers, the tilt of a man's eyes when he lied. He knew which hand a man favored, which streetlight outside the club flickered at exactly 9 o'clock every night. Small details that others overlooked became tools in his pocket. Fear kept his enemies awake, but precision kept his allies leaning on him. By his 30s, Gaspipe was no longer the kid running errands. He was sitting in the backrooms with the captains, his voice low but decisive. He didn't boast. He didn't need to. The room leaned toward him, waiting. But power is a weight. And the heavier it grew, the more he began to wonder who might be waiting for him to stumble. Gaspipe reached a point where even the city seemed to move around him. He had judges in his pocket, cops on his payroll, and politicians who owed him favors they could never say out loud. He called it insurance, others called it corruption. Either way, it meant doors opened before he even knocked. He knew which detectives would look the other way, which union leaders would push a strike, which contractor would inflate a bid. The web stretched wide, and at the center sat Anthony, quiet, calculating, untouchable, or so it seemed. He carried himself like a man who understood time was money, and money was respect. Meetings started on the minute, ended on his word. He hated excuses, despised delays. Efficiency was his religion. He liked rooms with one door and men who spoke directly. He liked loyalty, but he trusted no one. Trust, in his world, was another word for weakness. Yet paranoia was always there, whispering in the background. He switched apartments, changed phones, rotated drivers. He felt the city watching him, even when no one was around. And deep down, he knew it wasn't if trouble would come, it was when. And when it came, it would come from within. The trouble started like a draft sneaking through a closed window, hard to notice at first, but once you felt it, you couldn't ignore it. A deal fell apart without warning. A face he trusted stopped showing up. A car lingered a little too long at the corner, headlights dimmed, engine running low. Gaspipe wasn't a man who believed in luck, so he saw these things for what they were, cracks in the wall. The bosses shifted, alliances thinned, and whispers carried faster than cash. A friend of 20 years suddenly had too many excuses. Favors he once collected easily now came back delayed, watered down. He doubled his precautions, checked the locks twice, switched safe houses like changing shirts. Even in restaurants, he sat facing the door, fork in one hand, knife in the other, his eyes never resting. The paranoia didn't soften him, it sharpened him. He became colder, quicker to test loyalty, quicker to remind people why his name carried weight. But he could feel the ground moving under his feet. For every move he made, there seemed to be another shadow just behind it, matching his pace. And the one thing Anthony Casso hated most was a shadow he couldn't name. By the late 80s, Gaspipe's reach was undeniable. He wasn't the official boss, but in many ways, he controlled more than those who wore the crown. His methods were ruthless, even by mob standards. If he suspected you of betrayal, you didn't get a second chance. Sometimes you didn't even get a warning. Men disappeared, bodies were never found, and rumors filled the gaps like smoke in a closed room. The streets knew the pattern. When Gaspipe's name circled around, someone was already gone. He thrived on fear, but fear has a way of circling back. The law was watching closer, the feds pulling threads that led directly to him. He could feel their presence in the background, agents staking out diners, cameras pointed from rooftops, unmarked cars idling by the curbs. He still walked confident, still dressed sharp, but he knew the noose was being tied one knot at a time. And yet, he refused to slow down. Instead, he tightened his grip, more collections, more contracts, more silence enforced at the end of a barrel. He believed he could outrun anything if he stayed 2 steps ahead. But in the game he played, 2 steps ahead was never enough. The hammer finally dropped when the law caught up with him in the early 90s. It wasn't a dramatic raid with sirens and shouting, just quiet steps, a door opening, and suddenly the most feared man in New York was in cuffs. Inside the car, on the ride downtown, Gaspipe stared out the window like a man watching a movie he'd seen too many times. The city kept moving without him, neon flickering over wet streets, kids on corners who didn't even know his name. Prison walls closed around him, but Anthony Casso was never without leverage. He carried secrets, names, dates, bodies buried where no one had ever looked. That was his new currency. The same mind that built his empire now calculated survival. He weighed each piece of information like a gambler with chips, deciding which card to play, which to hold back. The mob had its rules: never talk, never fold, die with silence. But Gaspipe had already broken one rule after another to climb as high as he did. To him, rules were only useful until they got in the way. And in that cold cell, he started thinking about which rules he'd break next. Gaspipe made the move no one expected. He flipped. The man who built his name on fear now became an informant, trading loyalty for survival. It wasn't out of guilt. Anthony Casso never spoke about regret. It was calculation. He had a library of secrets, and each one could buy him a little more breathing room. He named names, exposed deals, mapped out murders that had been buried for years. Agents leaned in, pens racing across paper, while the underworld whispered his betrayal like a curse. Inside the mob, his name shifted from feared to despised. Men who once stood when he entered a room now spit when they heard it. To them, Gaspipe wasn't just another rat. He was a man who had built his empire on blood and then sold it piece by piece to save his own skin. His reputation, once unshakable, cracked beyond repair. But Anthony didn't care about respect anymore. Respect couldn't keep him alive. He wanted time, days, months, maybe years, and information was the only currency left to trade. Still, he must have known, the more he gave away, the less of himself he had left. And the walls never stopped closing in. Anthony Gaspipe Casso spent his last years as a ghost of the man he once was. Prison stripped him of the sharp suits, the dawn meetings, the shadowed authority that once made the city tremble. Now he was just another number, walking the yard, replaying old decisions in silence. His power, once built on certainty and fear, dissolved into a reputation that felt more like a cautionary tale than a legend. Even his body betrayed him, health fading, time pressing down harder than any rival ever could. But his name lived on, whispered in the kind of hushed tones that carried both awe and disgust. The story of Gaspipe wasn't just about one man's cruelty, it was about what happens when fear becomes your foundation. He had risen fast, ruled hard, and fallen just as brutally. For some, he was proof that the mob could still breed monsters. For others, he was a reminder that monsters die just like anyone else. If there's a lesson in his life, it's this: power bought with violence can never outlast time, and fear is a currency that always runs out. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more cinematic gangster stories like this one.